Hi everyone, we're part of the team at Constellar Consultancy, and today we're going to talk about going global and how you can transition your beauty brands into new markets. Hi, I'm Catherine Collins. I'm the founder of Constellar Consultancy, and we help startups and well-established brands solve problems, build sustainable strategies, and really scale globally. I've been working in the industry for about 15 years, and I started my first company in distribution in the Middle East, and then I began launching brands internationally and now consult full-time with Constellar. I'm super passionate about helping build brands that use beauty, to do good, and also globalizing beauty industry in a more positive, authentic way.
Hello, I'm Sarirah. I'm a digital strategist and trend forecaster, and I'm also the head of digital at Constellar, where we focus on building digital strategies for beauty and wellness brands so that they can tell their stories and future-proof their business to go global. We work with omnichannel and digital first brands, mainly in the US and Europe, and launching them out into new markets and really helping them to determine their global outlook for their strategies and marketing so that they can build and strengthen their omnichannel approach. Globalizing beauty is about sharing cultures and concepts. So when we talk about going global, it's actually in a really positive way. It's not about enforcing your beauty ideals or standards into other cultures. It's really about how to bring your brand ethos and core values and align it with people in other markets. So the attention to your omnichannel approach here and the growth is really important, and looking at digital as well for the accessible pathways to enter to new markets and make your international expansion a lot easier. Before moving into new markets, you must assess the viability of your brand in that space. So is there a demand for your product? Is your target customer already there? Does your brand actually fit into the ethos and the culture of that market? You already see demand for your product in that market, or is there a gap in the market that you can fill? And a good way to research this is to look for white space and emerging trends in other markets besides your own, so that you can see how your USP can fit into that. And also remember that having competitors in a market that you're looking to expand into is not a bad thing. It shows that there is a healthy demand for your product, and it should be more encouraging than off-putting.
Yeah. So next, we're actually going to talk about why international expansion is important. We're super passionate about bringing brands global. And essentially, often a company, once it's successful in their home country, they're like, what do we do next? And it really does make sense to take that business abroad. But there's a few reasons why this is really important. So firstly, I think it's about building a new customer base, or, you're meeting existing customer demands. So for instance, if you have social channels and a lot of your customers are in different countries and they're asking for it, it does make sense to go and, have on the ground presence there. It also allows you to build more recognition worldwide and also build a new customer base. And the next thing I think is really important is that it also allows you to enter, I would say, countries that aren't saturated. So if you're in a market that's saturated, it gives you access to new customers where your competitors do not operate. So for example, from my experience, I was working in the Middle East and there was a hair care brand, Orbe, which we distributed, and there was only one other main luxury hair care competitor, which was Philip Kingsley. So we could really capitalize on that and take over a lot of the market and get a lot of exposure, a lot of promotions. There's also brands like Avalon Organics. They went into pharmacy and had huge success there because there weren't many organic brands that were offering, large sizes and family offerings at that time. But it's also, I think, really important for international expansion to fuel your financial growth. So for instance, if you're taking your brand international, it allows you to, make your revenue more stable because you have more markets which are giving you more income. And also for many companies, it allows them to, you're obviously entering a new territory, so you're reaching more customers, so of course you're making more sales. And this of course leads on to investability. And I think, many brands these days, it's important that they grow and they can exit. So for an investor, I think showing that you have more customers and a bigger target market is definitely crucial for exit, and showing that you're not just, confined to your local area. So I do think going global in that case, if you are thinking of selling and you are thinking of getting investment, it's crucial that you define other markets that are, applicable for your brand.
And so one of the final things is that expansion opportunities are also for digital first brands. It's not just if you already have bricks and mortar presence. There is huge opportunity there for brands that have started online, but it's really important that from day one, you need to be fully aware of your customers and your target audience and what your overall brand goals and objectives are, because this is going to determine the kind of strategy that you put together for being able to expand internationally. Okay, for a digital first brand, going global can look like many things. It's not just about being able to ship worldwide. It's really important to have on the ground presence as well as what you're doing digitally to really grow that omnichannel approach. And a great example of this is how a lot of US brands who don't have any footing in the UK market, digitally or on the ground, they look to start growing that customer base through local marketing strategies. So they work with PR teams in the UK, they'll work with influencers in the UK market and start to gain that traction and a sense for demand for the brand before they actually physically move their presence over. And we've got some examples up here. So the first one is Milk Makeup. They had a strong digital bricks and mortar presence in the US, but in order to launch into the UK, they chose to partner with a well-known retailer, e-commerce retailer, Cult Beauty, not only for the e-commerce side of things, but they also collaborated on a pop-up store in London, which did really well and gained them a lot of recognition in the UK market. Now, of course, not everyone is like Milk Makeup in terms of having the budget and the resources to do this, but you do, I think the key takeaway here is you do need to consider your local marketing strategy, even if it's just to move online and offer, you know, shipping and accessibility in a different market. So another example we've got here is the Australian beauty brand Frank Body. And this is a brilliant example and probably one of my favorites of a digital first brand that used a strategy of acquiring their global customer base online first. And that's where they put all of their efforts and focus into. And this made the transition a lot easier for them to go into new markets, both physical and online. So their strong understanding of who their customer was from all of the digital marketing and strategy that they had already done over the years is what they were able to utilize. And, you know, that's through the targeted content creation that they did through the UGC, working with influencers. And this meant that they were able to really look at choosing the right channels that would create their global success in expansion. And I saw this article the other day and they were talking about how in 2020 Frank Body saw a 60% year-over-year sales increase, which is huge, especially after having a pandemic, that they're going from strength to strength. So I think if you're a digital first brand, don't be put off from the idea of what international expansion might look like for you. But if you're starting digital, really put all of that effort into understanding who your customer is and really putting across what your brand message and your brand goals are. So that when you go into any new market, even if the approach that you're using is slightly different, you're still being able to tell your same story and it's already got strength into other areas.
Yeah, and I think it'll make it a lot easier for digital first brands to enter new markets because they already know where their demand is and where their consumers are. So you can, you know, look at those markets first rather than just launching somewhere random because you think there's an opportunity. I would not advise doing that.
So I think the other thing to remember is that, yes, we definitely keep pushing, and you'll hear us repeat this a lot, the idea of your omni-channel approach. And the thing with digital is that it's not a fixed location. Your digital identity exists into every market that you go into, and people can see that even if you aren't available in that market. So it's really important to keep track of that and also keep track of what customers are asking for and what their feedback is. You might have a lot of people in a certain country that are really interested in being able to buy your brand, but you don't ship there. So keep these things in mind to help adapt your strategy and look for the best moves to make.
Yeah, and next I think we really want to talk about, you know, what you need to take into account when going global. So I want to run through some of the, you know, the key areas that are really important to consider before you do that. It's important to map that out. I think firstly, you've got to think about what kind of costs you must cover. So for instance, there's lots of local taxes, there's import costs, there's shipping costs. There's also, if you're entering into the EU and you want to service a lot of the EU countries, you've got to think about fulfillment centers and setting those up, which, I mean, it's amazing if you're doing that because it can make your life a lot easier when expanding globally, but also, costs for marketing. Do you need to have staff? If you're going into retailers, are you going to have to pay staff to do that for you? So I think mapping that out really helps. Also, the next thing is, do you have the right margins? Time and time again, I think we see brands that, I mean, there's been a few instances actually where they haven't had the margins to work with distributors and things like that, and that's been very difficult. So I think when you start out, you think about, you can obviously put your price up in certain markets, but you have to think about who gets what and how, what you get at the end of it. And this is very much also in terms of cost. It's about how many markets you're entering. It is a costly venture. It also is, there's a lot of time and patience involved too, because all markets work differently and cultures are different. But if you're deciding to conquer the UK, like China and Australia together, you're going to need a ton of resources to do that. I would say, establish yours first and move out, unless, for instance, if you're shipping globally and doing digital, that makes things sometimes a little bit easier, but there's costs involved with that too. I think the next thing you've got to think about is what regulatory requirements you have. So, for instance, in Indonesia, it's actually mandatory to have halal certification. And also in the Middle East, it's really beneficial. So you can't actually enter that market. In the EU, you have to get testing and regulatory, but you also have to get a responsible person. And because of Brexit, there's even more stuff going on now. But you can get companies that are based in Ireland and the UK who will do both. So there's a fair few costs involved with that. And I think if you're doing any MPD, you should, work, and you're thinking of expanding globally, is work with a regulatory advisor to make sure that your labels and everything's up to speed before you do that. Also, the next point is, what resources do you have, and what can you actually acquire within your budget? So do you need to have international business development managers, sales managers? Do you need digital teams to support launches? Or I think we're going to talk later on how you can rely on distributors and things, but what sort of merchandising do you need to do? So for instance, if you're going into the Middle East, it's quite a promotional market, so you're going to need a ton of budget to help do like gondolas and things like that, and exposures, and it's driven by that, and exclusives and things. So I think, map out what that's going to look like, especially if you're speaking with a distributor, they can give you a better idea of that. The last one is, have you done your market research and competitor analysis? Actually, it's not the last one, but we talk about this all the time at Constellar, and we do this with our clients all the time. But this leads back to, I guess, our first point, but is there actually a demand for you in that market? There's no point. Don't get put off if there's other competitors. It means there's actually demand for you there. And if you have a point of difference, then why not? But for instance, if you're launching, there's certain brands that just won't work in certain markets because there's not a desire for them. So don't, really think about that. Is your target customer there? And I think also just your channels, they vary so much from market to market. So for instance, one brand in the US might be in Whole Foods, but in France, it would be in parapharmacies, or in the Middle East, you might be in pharmacies. Not every market has Ultas, has Sephora's. It's very, very different, and there's different independents and niches and things. So don't be put off by that. Just be open to adapting. And I think the last one is about timeframes. I've launched a lot of brands internationally, and everyone works so differently. You have to be really patient, because not everyone works the way you do, or in the culture you're in. And culturally, things are very different. They're a very different pace. I don't mean to always draw in the Middle East, but it is an incredibly different pace, and you do have to have a lot of patience, and it can either move really slow or move really quick. And, I think just being mindful of that, it doesn't mean it's not going to work out. It just means you have to keep that in mind. But I think those would be the main areas that I would consider before you start making those moves. And secondly, if you're dealing with third parties, I guess I'm pro distributors if they're a good distributor. I was a distributor before. I started out in distribution in my early 20s with beauty brands. But I think the first thing is, you've got to choose the right partner for your brand. You've got to choose someone who's passionate about it, who's keen to get their team to understand it, and someone who really wants to drive your brand and that you can trust, because essentially they should be an extension of your team, and they need to be as passionate about it, either because they love the product or because they know they can get sales. But you need to see that and feel that. And I think we should go through some of the pros of working with a distributor or a large global retailer. I think the pros of working with a large global retailer like Douglas in the EU, or Maca, for instance, or Sephora, means if you have the resources to support a in-house. So for instance, you have your marketing, you have your social media, then you can work directly with them and enter these new markets. And if that's enough for you initially, because sometimes you're doing exclusive or whatever, but generally, I think if you're not in that position, not many brands are, I would say work with a distributor. The pros of working with them would be that a distributor understands that market better than you ever can, because they live there, they work there, they know the consumers, and they can guide you in all the nuances of how things work. They're essentially, they should be your eyes and ears on the ground. And they, as I said before, they should really be an extension of your team. But I think the most important thing is nowadays you have to look for a distributor that has a digital experience, or has digital experience, I mean, so they can align with your brand, especially when you're doing omni-channel marketing, because it's important that they understand how that works and how, you know, they can digitally support you with their team. But in order to do that, you should probably create a brief. There's tons of things you need to create to go with distributors, but one of the most important things is to create a brief that tells them about your brand and what you stand for, what's important, and you know, what your values are, what your pillars are, so that they can work with those and grow them in their way in that market. And lastly, apart from all the other things you need, like marketing material and price lists and etc. and sampling, I think one of the main points is don't undercut your partners. So not you intentionally do that, but that probably means not shipping to the countries that you're distributing in, or if you do, don't undercut the price that it's being sold for in that country. And this also goes for retailers too. We've had many experiences of brands shipping into countries internationally and not realizing that they were cheaper than what it was being sold for there. So I think in a nutshell, that's a few things to consider when you're working with third parties like distributors or agents or retailers.
So one of the other things to consider is your global marketing strategy. And this goes back to not only for digital first brands, but in building and strengthening your omnichannel approach. So the first point is to not underestimate the importance of marketing collateral. And that's something that, you know, Catherine's talked a lot about on the last slide, whether you're going bricks and mortar or online. Yeah. Because when you're working with third parties, it's so important to have those resources and the budgets to create appropriate marketing collateral for those new markets. It also plays an important role in first impressions for new customers, and also to support the retailers that you're going to work with so that you can have the maximum growth potential possible there. Mm-hmm. And as Catherine had mentioned before, you know, in some markets, promotional materials are key and they are going to be more important than some of the other factors. So whether that's, you know, like merchandising units, you know, marketing collateral, yeah, exactly, okay. Things that you hand out to people, sampling, things like this are much more prevalent in other markets than maybe the one that you're currently in. Mm-hmm. And the other thing which we've been going on about a lot is your omnichannel approach is so key, no matter how many markets that you launch in. It also means that you need to consider your digital platforms. If you're a digital first brand, this is probably something that is going to already be in your strategy if you're planning on going global. Mm-hmm. But if you aren't online, then you need to consider this based on what social platforms or digital channels that you choose to set up on. And it also means considering the partnerships that you partner with in different markets, because as we've said before, your digital identity is one thing as a whole. So even if you want to launch local strategies in one market, people in other markets can still see who you've worked with. Yeah. So you need to consider that across the board. So as we said, you know, you can tailor your activity per market, but you're still one brand with one core message. Other things I think to consider are the languages and multiple social accounts that you offer depending on your market of choice. I think for the most part, people tend to, well, at the moment, they tend to have, you know, maybe an Instagram account that's for the European market, one that's maybe official and it's the US based one, and then one that's for the Asian market as well. But it's important to think about things like if you are going to expand into China, they use different platforms like WeChat, and they have a different approach to marketing. You know, they look at SMS a lot more. You know, their influencers, they're called calls, so key opinion leaders. Instagram is not such a big deal over there, and actually their marketing is a lot more social proof driven. So it's based on the reviews and almost like a digital word of mouth. So it's really important to consider how different your strategy might be if you're going to be launching into those markets. However, outside of maybe the Chinese market, we do find that global brands are tending to veer towards having one official account per social channel, and building that global omnichannel strategy in that way, and involving their distributors more as well, so that they're kind of building out one big community where everyone's involved and feeding back in across markets, so that they can ensure that their brand message is consistent across the board.
Mm-hmm. I think that draws on really well here. I mean, for instance, if you had different languages, and if you were, sorry, bricks and mortar, you don't need to do, the most important thing would be to do your collateral in different languages. But this is about cultural nuances. So as we've touched on, I think when you enter new markets, it's culturally it's different wherever you go. Even if it speaks the same language, it varies, and that varies even within subsets. So you have to consider that. But it's the idea that one size does not fit all. I think you have to localize your marketing assets so they're culturally appropriate. So, you know, once you've found a good market that's a good fit, you've got to review every part of your brand, your logo, your collateral, your product names. Even we've had to change names before for wording or even imagery. So, I mean, I think before, for instance, we launched a tanning brand in Saudi and stuff. So we had to change all the imagery because most of the imagery was showing women who were uncovered. So we had to really edit that and show, you know, tanning quite differently. But also, I think you have to understand the diversity of your audience and adapt. That's really, really key. So, you know, things like halal certification is important to that market. You should do that. If there's, you know, language things you have to consider, as I said, imagery things. So really think and speak with the partners you're working with, and ask their advice on what they think about your collateral and what you should do. Depending on which market you enter into. Even if you're just going from US to UK, there is some different, you know, we prefer different SKUs over what you have. There in the US, there's different preferences. So it's just really important to consider all of that. And also you need to consider preferences of your consumers. So for instance, if your products have fragrance in them, in certain markets, stronger fragrances are preferred, lighters than others. So also with key ingredients. So for instance, we have all, you know, in the US, UK, Europe, squalane and CBD, we're all starting to hear about these ingredients, but in other markets, they may not be trending or resonate in the same way with your consumers. So I think these are just a few of the things you need to consider culturally, how everyone's different, you know, before you start entering new markets.
The key takeaway from all of this is that you really need to remember to think global, but act local. That's become our new little catchphrase whenever we talk about international expansion. It's important to understand your consumer in any new market before proceeding to go over there, and to really focus on building hyper-local market strategies, both for bricks and mortar and for your digital presence.
Yeah. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us on any of these by email or any of these channels. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this and, you know, help you with any questions you may have.
Thank you.
Bye.